I'm lost among the millions, just an empty head filled with the sky.
Welcome to the Already in Progress podcast that just started as a telephone call and now apparently is going to be a series, Dumpsterfireside Chats, starring myself, Chantelle Aimée Osman, and the amazing and prolific Josh Stallings. And we shall discuss life and all of the pitfalls therein, possibly touching on writing, sometimes movies, sometimes just deeply exploring our own psyche to the boredom of listeners.
King or an alien.
Gather round, children, and let's start a fire. Warm your hands by the dumpster. Listen to Auntie Chantelle and Uncle Josh tell you about the horrors of the real world.
And welcome to Dumpster Fireside Chats, where we just talk about things and laugh so that we don't cry at the state of the world. And I know that one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was the perils of success. Could we add a dun dun dun?
Dun dun wah. Now, for most of us hustling out here like we are, success sounds like the dream goal. What are the perils of success?
Well, I think, just like with any positive thing, there can be stress. Oh boy, that was terrible. let me start that. With each thing, something else happens and then we die. There's my answer.
That's right. Okay, I get that. Well, I know what you're talking about. Okay, I just got back from Left Coast Crime and it was joyous and wonderful. And I saw a lot of good friends and I'm stressed out to the point where I'm having a hard time remembering my own phone number.
Right.
So that was fun and stressful.
Exactly. Thank you for that perfect example. I think that when a good thing happens to you, there can be as many, perils. There can be pitfalls that are just different from, when you're not succeeding, there are different perils and pitfalls. Even success sucks sometimes, to be honest, because for example, we're both in writing and publishing and, people who get a dream is to get like a 6-figure deal published at a major publishing house, all of your face on a bus, if that's what you want, your book in a Times Square billboard, all of these things. And people go, oh, that's the dream. That's what I want. But people often don't think of the stresses, the perils that go along with that success. The fact that you got this 6-figure advance, and particularly, let's say, if you're a debut author or an author without a particularly large following yet, it's going to be really hard to get your name out there enough to sell enough books to earn out that advance because you don't get any more money. And maybe you might not get another book deal if you don't earn out. So sell as many books as covers, that 6 figures. That is a really lofty hedge to climb over.
Yeah. We've all known people who got the 3-book deal that was life-changing and then 2 books in or 1 book in, they went, yeah, we can't continue.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's no fault of the writer. That's when a book is a bestseller is really amazing because it doesn't happen that often. It's even ones where they put a lot of money into them.
Well, go ahead.
No, to make it, I get the bus shelf, but it isn't really, I think for most of us writers and most writers I know, the dream is to have a lot of people reading your book. And that's what the bus shelter means, is that a lot of people get to read your book.
Yeah.
I think we're hunting readers more than cash, most of us, or else we wouldn't be writers.
Oh, that's very true. But yeah, so people assume because they've been handed this dream, that's it. They did it. There's nothing, no perils, no worry that will come with this. And it comes with its own equally stressful set of problems. And just like you said, if you get that 3-book deal, you've got several options of how things can go, straight to hell.
Well, let's say you get it, and then the next day after your book is going to be released, a pandemic hits.
Oh, Yeah,
And
that can happen. I've heard
you have no way to sell it, and you aren't going to be on the Today Show then because all they're talking about is pandemic. So
Right.
unless the book is called Omicron the Pandemic, you probably are you're gonna miss the news cycle, which is really where things break big.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's one right there. And of course, any news, this has happened before, election years, the war in Ukraine, like all of these things disrupt sales cycles. Nobody's, looking to buy a book that day or that week. They're all, focused on the news and what's happening. So that can scuttle your chances right there. And that's completely outside of your control. Book one does, okay. And so they give you a second book or you had a 2-book contract. And then they don't put enough effort in marketing behind the second book because, it wasn't worth it for the first book. So they're going to allocate that money somewhere else. So now you're set up to fail in a new and completely different way than you were for book one. And then unfortunately, if they don't renew that contract after book 2 fails dismally, because see above, they didn't put any marketing budget behind it. And you've got a great new idea, you're going to have a hard time getting that in front of another publisher because they look at that track record, which you really had very little to do with at all. Other than writing the book that they thought was good enough to publish. So I'd say you won. But the rest of it don't have any control over. And now you're going to have less opportunity to be published. That's why you see so many, think of Thriller Fest every year or BoucherCon or something. There's always somebody who's got that big breakthrough deal. And then the next year at BoucherCon, you don't see them anymore. And that can happen. And it's just, the next thing didn't get picked up anywhere because they looked at this, huge money that was put out and didn't earn out and sales were dismal and whoops.
And these things apply to the record business. They apply to the movie business. Every one of those businesses we've heard of these things. They even have things called the sophomore curse in filmmaking and in writing. But another one, just to put one more for you writers and make you panic fully, is your project can get orphaned, which means the editor that loves you and bought your book and brought it in either leaves the business or moves to another publisher, and now your project is orphaned. So it's given sometimes to a good publisher, to a good editor, sometimes to an editor who doesn't like your work and has nothing to gain by its success. And all, if it's successful, everyone will say, "Oh, it was the person who bought it who's no longer here." If it fails, they'll say it was that person and you. So they have nothing to gain or lose from it. Now, that isn't always the case. There's a lot of good editors, but I think publishing is the marriage between an editor that gets a writer and a writer that gets an editor. If that connection doesn't work, if they don't speak the same language, it's very hard to put out a good book. I think we both have complicity in working together to make a good book.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. And also, speaking of orphaning, this was just, who knows when this episode will actually release. But just last week, I think it was, or potentially the week before, one of the horror publishers closed. And a bunch of authors who had their books under contract there, all of those, no longer had a home and people were scrambling. I took some submissions myself from the orphans, but that's something, especially right now in this climate with a pandemic, with the supply chain issues, with, bookstores closing, with printers closing. We're having a hard time getting, if we get our books printed, which is like an act of God at this point, we've had a couple of cases where they've had to sit in the warehouse and we've missed deadlines because there's not enough people in the warehouse to get them from the warehouse and shipped out. So
I'm sorry to laugh. I know it's horrible, but whoever foresaw lack of paper or lack of people to even just move it across a warehouse is the issue. I mean,
I if you had said to me 5 years ago, we're out of paper, I'd be like, haha, funny April Fool's joke. Now we're out of paper. Now we're banning books. And we're just going along with it because, it's, yeah, sure. Okay. What's the next thing?
I'm going to corner the market on parchment. Okay. And quill pens.
Yeah, no, I have said to my boss several times, I'm like, do I actually need to learn how to print a book on a press? Is this something I should be learning right now? Do I need to go to Staples and buy all of the reams of paper, just in case? And I was only half kidding because, pandemic mindset and, we had to hoard all the toilet paper.
Well, that's where the paper product went. Yeah. Now you solved it.
Well, actually what I'm told, and I think that the issue comes from a lot of different fronts, but what I'm told is that it was actually pandemic related. And unfortunately, not to blame our evil overlords, it was Amazon packaging because everything was being delivered for almost 2 years nonstop. And honestly, I'm still doing delivery whenever I can. But so they were using all of that paper to have the shipping boxes and it's not being recycled fast enough. So we depleted our supply of paper.
This is
depressing. I know. I think that's kind of the plot of our podcast.
Yeah, I think we've nailed it. No, I was thinking I grew up and I knew because Earth Day happened and being raised by radicals and hippies, we knew things were getting tight. But I think 2 generations behind us were people that thought everything was unending. Resource was unending. There's no way you could run out. We kept spreading the country and going, wait, just take over that country. Nobody's there. Well, there were some people there, but let's leave that to the side right now. In a bloody mess on the side. So we just kept thinking, if you just keep moving, there's always enough to go around. There's enough paper.
Well, I think
where there isn't. We're running
point.
Out of things.
Except it does surprise me, but I think we're seeing, okay, we can do a deep dive into a weird theory. So I agree with what you said, but I think, clearly our, colonizing everything. Well, I mean, we still do dumb shit like that, but that was a little bit before. What I think is interesting, and I think we're seeing the same mindset now or will be as this generation, goes through past the pandemic. But we had World War I. Where many things were rationed and cut off and people couldn't get resources. And so I think then after that, there was kind of a gluttony because once everything was back and available, people just lived like there was no tomorrow and ate up all the resources because they had been living without. Then in short order, we have World War II and we have rationing and, we had, there wasn't, nylons, there wasn't metal available because we're making tanks and bullets and all of that. I mean, even down to those kind of core resources, not just food, that was being rationed. And so people were living without in large parts of the world. And then the war's over and slowly things get back to quote unquote normal. And again, then you've got these, it's kind of like the baby boomer generation where everybody was, just resources. They ate up all the resources. We can do whatever we want. They're unlimited. We'll just take over. Let's, build new pipelines. We don't care. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see because pandemic and we had rationing to a degree. And I think that we're probably seeing the pendulum already shifting toward, I think we can see it with, people just deciding the pandemic is over, despite the fact that it isn't. But everybody's like, no, we're done. Just doing whatever we want and give us all the resources. I could be very wrong, but that's a pattern that I see.
I think that swing has to do with, I believe we don't have a cultural memory that goes much past our own parents and what they told us about their lives. I think we ran into it when we're getting vaccinated, that my parents, my mother knew people who had polio. She knew a lot of people. That was a big deal to her. And she told us about it. And we still knew some people that were in wheelchairs or with braces on their legs, but not a lot. That was of her generation. So when this came along and they said vaccine, I just went, oh, we've already dealt with this. I know how to deal with it. But I'm of a generation that my parents knew about that.
Right.
I think our memory culturally doesn't go beyond our own parents and what they told us. We don't believe beyond that. It's just something in a book. How could that happen to us? It didn't happen to my parents or anyone I know. Well, it happened to your grandparents. So maybe you should think about that. But I don't think we have that cultural memory. I think you're right. I think that's why the pendulum swings.
Well, and I think also it's cultural memory, but I think it's, kind of honestly, it's hardwired into our brain to be that way. It's kind of like childbirth, it's, I'm told, extremely painful. And, women say it's the most agonizing thing ever. And then, in a month, they've forgotten that pain. Like if you ever broke a bone or, had something happen and you forget, even though at the time it was very painful, you kind of forget that pain, basically so that you can keep functioning, because otherwise you'd just be stuck, remembering that. And I kind of think that that's what we do with these large scale social and cultural issues as well. I think that, we handled, quote unquote, the pandemic, and we had to do certain things. And now, like, we swam to the other side of the bowl and like, pandemic? What pandemic?
Oh, the goldfish metaphor. I like it. That's us.
So, I mean, I think we're hardwired to do that. And I think it's a hard thing for us to get out of. And I think that that's why some of these large scale issues, just like you're saying, like, even global warming or something, it's like, it's too big for us to kind of process, or most of us, it's something that's so sweeping and overarching and, takes many generations. It's kind of like if you look at politics and particularly I'm really mad at the mayor in New York right now, which I probably shouldn't say it on the podcast, but the way he's dealing with homelessness and mental health issues is just terrible. And part of the problem, which is the case in many major cities, is that they try a quick fix, kick them out of the subway, do this, do that. And it's generally purely cosmetic. But also it doesn't have any long-term goals, because it's very hard when you've got like a mayor who's there for, 4 years or whatever, and other officials who are there even shorter, to go, well, that's really the next guy's problem. Or, well, I'd have to have the collaboration for, a 20-year project, and it's going to start slow and we're not going to see any results in my term, but like the next mayor. And well, we don't want to do that then, because it's the next mayor who's going to get credit for it. Kind of going back to that editor earlier. So it's really hard, for many reasons for us, I think, to think in a longer term way, which is kind of stupid.
I think you're right. And I will join you on the soapbox for a second. Please do. It's very nice and sunny up here. It's nice. We've got a beautiful fire burning. We're doing good. I've started to see this a lot as people saying what we need for homeless people is mental health help, because the assumption now is that if you're homeless, you're mentally ill. And I've started saying this as a return to that. If you could do me a favor, go into any inner city, any big city, not inner, any part of a big city, stay out for 24 to 48 hours without a lock on a door or a bathroom, and tell me if you're depressed clinically and have mental health problems. And I believe all of us, I would be, any of us would be. I don't think we have a mental health problem. I think we have a much simpler problem to solve, but more expensive. We have a roof and locked door problem. We have too many people that don't have roofs. Some of them are mentally ill. Some of them certainly are. But a lot of them didn't come to us mentally ill. They wound up on the street and became mentally ill. There are families all over LA that are living in cars. Well, that would make anyone crazy. So I don't want to see this solution is mental health. It is a component of the solution, but the solution is they don't have roofs. And that's the problem. We don't have enough homes, or the homes are too expensive, at least in LA and New York. I know that's the problem. Yeah, so that's my soapbox.
I completely agree with you, but it's also, it's one of those things where there's so many issues that feed into a central problem. And right. I think, there are clearly people out there who are homeless due to mental health issues. But you're right. There's also people who have mental health issues due to being homeless. Right. And also, one of the largest populations of both are veterans from several generations, which, have fought. And then there's supposed to be services like the VA that help them and don't really help them. It was actually kind of nice, she says, about the pandemic. It was kind of nice during the pandemic because particularly in New York, a lot of the hotels and other places that were empty were used to house homeless people during this time. And guess what? Crime went down. I mean, of course, there was also a pandemic and people weren't on the streets, but I'm still waiting. I don't know about you, the crime editor, writer in me. I assumed we'd be finding so many bodies buried in backyards. I really did. Like nobody.
I assume that on any given day.
Well, that's true. But I just figured, there's so many people that are stuck in houses or apartments with people and they've never had to be around somebody 24/7. And so I kind of assumed that there'd be a lot more. Oh, yeah, he just left one day and never came back. And of course, he's actually buried in the backyard. I'm seeing fewer of those stories than I thought I would. Maybe we just haven't reported the people missing yet. But surprise.
Dark and true.
surprise. So when, things started lifting after lockdown and, the hotels wanted their rooms back, guess what? Incidences of crime went up because suddenly these people who had been housed and had a roof over their head, as you say, and a locked door, were forced back out again. And that has to be, if they didn't have PTSD before, just in general, they probably do now of being forced back out onto the street.
Yeah, I think it's sometime because what scares me, because I've done too much research on our justice system and our policing, what scares me is when even well-meaning liberals are going, we need to get tough on crime. Tough on crime has always meant cruelty.
Yes.
It has never looked at the real question of how do we rehabilitate. We do not look in this country at rate of recidivism. We look at how many people we got locked up, and we think that's a good number to study. It's not the number that you should be looking at. If you think prisons work, look at recidivism rate. If it's the ones that don't have people coming back into the system are what I would say in big letters is working. But I think every time we do a Nordic model, we go, we're being too kind. You're hugging thugs. Can't do that. Because we're kind of mean-spirited here in this country. I don't quite understand that because I think we're good people as people. I think as a group we get together and we're kind of unkind.
I don't disagree with that, but I think we should start the Hug a Thug program. I
actually think that's important. I do, actually. That's weird. We've watched in AA, there's, my brother went to the Houston prisons a lot through AA, and he said, you start out and all these men stand in a circle, they won't hold hands, they put their fists against each other's fist, right? This is pre-pandemic when we all started doing that. And he said, if you're with them long enough, they start hugging, but it's going to take 6-8 months to teach somebody to go, I think I want to hug this person because they're saving my life. But that's a whole nother issue. I want to get back to this success thing, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
There is a part of the success question that is up to the writer. And that's the one that also happens is the stress that happens. And I've seen people who got success too young, had a big movie deal, and kind of did crap the rest of their writing career because they thought they knew everything.
Yeah.
As opposed to when we wrote that great first piece, we didn't think we knew anything. We had the guts to think we could do it, but we didn't think we knew everything. And I've seen a couple of writers that I was close with fall apart, both in Hollywood and outside of Hollywood, because the first book was so successful that they suddenly knew everything and stopped asking and questioning. I think when you stop questioning your own work, why do I work so hard? Because I question everything I write. I think everything I write needs me to think about it 16 different times. I know that's me and I'm a little bit nuts. But I think once you assume that what you write is golden, you're in trouble.
Oh, I think that's very true. I mean, I always go back to the smartest person in the room is the one standing and listening and not the one standing in the middle of the room talking.
Right. Unless it's us, because
yeah, that's true. I mean, we are doing a podcast and we're kind of talking at people.
If we neither of us were talking, it would be a very quiet podcast.
That's very true. We could call it the Calm Podcast.
We won't say more than a word a minute.
A counterpoint, to this one, and we can talk about things like flowers and trees and rainbows.
I'm done.
Yeah, but I think success. I think there are. I talk to my students a lot about like figuring out your career path, because being a writer, just like you're talking about in Hollywood or a musician or something, there's kind of this big unattainable goal. Get the record contract at 25, or get the 6-figure book deal from Simon and Schuster, or pick the thing, and like. It's kind of, almost mythical, this, I think I know, this happened to a friend of a friend, but, it doesn't happen to everybody. But at the same time, everybody goes into whichever business we're talking about here, thinking it's going to happen to them. And so like even though that, this is the unicorn, you still deep down go, this is totally happening to me. It's just a matter of time. So every time it doesn't happen and you do something smaller or different, you're so disappointed in yourself, because you're like, but I promised myself that unicorn. And so, unfortunately or fortunately, I mean, there are great, wonderful, mythical things about publishing and Hollywood and, the music industry. But really, at the end of the day, they're boring businesses. I mean, we're dealing, like I said, right now with, not getting books out of a warehouse. This isn't like, we're all wearing furs and drinking martinis and, just enjoying our penthouses. And, it's just not, but that's what, we see on TV and we think. But this is why I talk to my students about setting a career path, because to kind of manage those expectations. Because the only person you're disappointing in most of these spheres are yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, your publisher might not love you because you didn't sell millions of copies of your book. But again, just like I said before, that's not your fault. I mean, you can be so personable and, great on TV. But that doesn't mean that that's going to translate into sales. So, the factors really lie heavily with the publishing house, and it's more of they approached it wrong. Their marketing team picked the wrong cover. They didn't place it timing wise appropriately. These are things that are beyond your control, so you should not be beating yourself up over them. So that's why, again, go back to create a real career path. Like where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Are you still writing in the same genre? And the other thing that you have to think about as a writer, which a lot of people don't, is you have to, I mean, you do, but at this point you've done very well. You have a career path and you know what you want out of it. And you're several books in, but people don't think beyond the book that they're writing very frequently, especially if it's their first book. They go, I want to be a writer. I'm writing my debut novel. And they don't really think about, maybe beyond, I think this might be a series. But they don't think about book 3 or book 5, or, maybe I'd be better off getting, learning the ropes at a smaller publisher. And then, I have a big breakout idea and I, try to get that to one of the big 4 or 5 publishers. What kind of agent do I want? And the answers to these questions should not just be like the biggest agent in the world, the biggest money deal I can make, the biggest publisher, like I said, like we started this out, you have to think about with each one of these successes comes a parallel peril. Oh, say that 5 times fast.
I like it. A parallel peril. If you have a parallel peril, shouldn't you intellectually have a parachute?
Yes. So, but these are the things, I think really at the end of the day, I think that like I said, I think the writer, yes, you worry about making your publisher happy and paying that, earning out on your book. And these are important questions that as a professional, you have to think about. But with that, big disappointment or, like I said, the only person that you're dealing with that is yourself, and that it didn't happen the way you saw it happening. Nobody else there is disappointed. They probably loved your book. Clearly, they believed in it enough to buy it.
From a writer's standpoint, one of the ways to stay away from that is not compare other people's outsides to your insides. Meaning, you're writing the kind of books you want to write, then don't compare them to somebody that you know on Facebook who suddenly got a $7 million deal. That never happens in publishing, but it gets a big deal because they're doing what they're doing. You're doing what I am aware that there are certain writers, I happen to be one of them, who is continually experimenting with what I want to do with form.
Right.
That keeps me interested. Now, that isn't the best way to build a brand. A brand is really good if you write a good book, but the next one is very much like it. So people know, margarine, some brand of margarine may not be, or Charmin's may not be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But everyone knows, you pick up Charmin's, you know what it is. Well, if I wrote 3 very hard-boiled books in a trilogy, and then the next book was a disco heist novel, and then the next book is about a police officer in L.A. and a intellectually disabled man.
Boy, that sounds like a really good book.
Yeah, that is a good book, but that's the arc of my career. Now, none of those are building a brand unless the brand is my voice.
Right.
But if you loved Moses McGuire, which are very hard, 3 very hard-boiled books about the sex trade that get worse and worse because the more I researched, the harder they got. And then you read a book about, a transsexual hero in 1976 robbing a disco and all the things that happen in young Americans, you go, wait, I was signing on for the one about the hard guy. These kids are glitter rock kids. I'm confused. And I'm aware that's what I do and that it has a certain peril to it. Now, it doesn't mean there won't be a breakout book and then people will look. When you break out, you finally, and you get big enough, people look at it and go, Don Winslow has written a lot of different books, but now he is the brand you're reading. What connects them all is you go, I love Don Winslow. Well, he's now a best-selling author, so you know who he is. So that's the brand. Until then, you have to be building a brand.
Yeah.
Or not.
Well, I also think that a brand can be a trap.
I agree.
mean, look at me with like perils and traps and like everything.
I love it.
There's quicksand, there's snakes. Just don't do it.
You are keeping this thing very dumpster fiery. Thank you.
So I think, I agree. I think that especially nowadays, I'm going to go like 3 places before I actually make my point,
Please.
Right now, and ever since the pandemic started, and even honestly slightly before that, it is really hard. There are very few, if any, in-person events. There are very few, if any, conferences. There are, bookstores have closed. These things it's very hard to get your book in front of people right now. It always was a challenge, but it's particularly difficult now. And if I tell my authors one thing, it's like, I want you, especially, I hate social media, but we're relying a lot on it for, spreading word about books right now, because there's not a lot of other ways to do that. But I want my authors to be their own brand. Like, I want people to go, oh, that person is really interesting. I think they're funny. I enjoy, reading their posts. So now I'm going to pick up their book, as opposed to making the book the brand, which, of course, spread the word about your book too. But I think that the best thing for longevity is making yourself the brand. I know so many people who fall into the trap of making the books the brand, and whether or not they brand that first book, and like it even down to the stupidest thing of like, don't make your Twitter handle your first book title, because then you're stuck with that and you're going to have 30 books after that. Like, you brand yourself, right?
Right.
And I also think that what you write as your first book or your 10th book, whatever it is probably not going to be what you want to write next or 5 books down the line. And so relying too much on creating that brand, I know people who, depress themselves, to be quite honest, because they're stuck, because they think that they can only write a certain thing. Well, I've gotten used to people knowing that every book has a, big idea in it, or I've gotten used to every book, it has to be, a cozy detective mystery. And I'd really like to write something gritty, and so, and honestly, not being able to write what you're passionate about can cause, again, stress, peril, mental health issues, because, you're not being allowed to create what you want to create. So I think that branding is very important, but if you adhere too closely to the brand, particularly of a specific book or thing, it's kind of like going back to that young person who, got a big deal right out of the gate. And it did well, and now they'd be stuck. Every book has to be a bigger, better idea, because the first one was, this stellar breakthrough thing. Well, people might not necessarily want to read that, or they might not. The writer then can't complete it because there's too much pressure to make the next one bigger, better, shinier.
I agree with all that, and I think somehow I have witnessed with big writers. Now we're talking, I'm lucky enough to be at a level where I don't think it makes a big difference what I write, that people want to read me, but they aren't droves of them. I'm not a household name
yet.
Charlie Houston was hurt by Skinner, one of his best books, his last book written before he went into TV. One of his best, stunning, but way intellectual. He spent a long time researching it. It's some big ideas and some big ideas we need to be reading, but it didn't do as well because it didn't have that thing that he was known for, which was sort of personal crime stories. Mm-hmm. It was a big idea. And I think each one of us have to, that's a question. As long as your advances don't outstrip what you can sell them, how many you sell, it's actually good. You can write whatever the hell you want, really. There's a leap point where you go, oh, I'm known to write fantasy books, and now I wrote a sci-fi book. And it didn't do as good numbers, and people are upset. Well, you have to be okay with that fact, that there are some audiences that don't cross over. Right. And some that do. But in the really big numbers, and I don't think any of this, I want to be really clear to other writers. I don't think any of this matters. You have to write what you believe. We have to believe in our writing.
Exactly.
But then don't be pissed off if it doesn't sell huge numbers. Right. Make your expectations match the work you're doing. I don't think if my book doesn't sell 1 million copies, it's a bad book. It's still the best book I know how to write and a book I love. But there are certain other constraints in the marketplace. So it isn't, and as you said, it's not always you. Well, so part of that is just manage your expectations. That's what I was trying to say.
No, I agree. And that's kind of like going back to what I was saying about the career path. Because, it has to work for you. And each person's career is completely different. It's like you said, you can't compare yourself to somebody, who's doing great on Facebook, et cetera. And although I do recommend, like, if you have an author that you really like, their work and admire and say, okay, I'd like to kind of make mine evolve the way theirs did. There's nothing wrong with that, to have kind of a goal in mind in that way. But you can't just compare yourself. It's apples to oranges. And I don't know any two people who have followed the exact same career trajectory. And at the end of the day, you should be writing for yourself. Yes, of course, you want the books to get out to an audience, and that's what's happening. And you can't be disappointed that, it's not enough. And it goes back to, I'm not a huge quote person, but I always use a Vonnegut quote with my students. He said, if you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia. And he said that. and he said that.
That's lovely.
In reference to the fact that you should just be writing for yourself or one reader, which should be yourself. You can't write for the whole world, or your book is going to suffer. He said it in a lot more attractive way than I'm putting it, but it goes back to that, you should be, your career is for you, and yes, if you end up making enough money to live as a writer, that's amazing. And you're ahead of the game. You're so far ahead of the game. I talk to so many writers who are so depressed and want to quit their day jobs, and they just don't make enough money, and they're waiting, and they're trying. And there are also other ways that you can make money writing. That's not just writing and selling a novel. Like, if you're going to be a career writer, you can be a career writer. You can do tie-in work. You can do freelance articles. You can be, you can edit. You can teach writing. There's a lot of things around writing that you can do to supplement your writing income, and that way you're at least around words all the time. But yeah, you just have to do it for you. And a sales number, although great, these are things that aren't, it's not like you did it poorly. You should have been handing out your books on the Brooklyn Bridge. Like, when writers complain about the sales numbers, it's really, again, I feel like it's mostly on, well, depending, especially with a big publisher, most of the onus is on a publisher for marketing and sales and that. Now, when you're working with a smaller publisher, it kind of does go hand in hand. Like, there is a lot that the author, it really helps if the author does events and talks about their book and has a presence and all of that. But that's not necessarily as true when you have, ridiculous large marketing budgets at a major publishing house. There's not a lot you can do that really is going to uptick that. I discovered on Tricky, our book that you and I did together. Yes.
I am still finding people that are evangelizing about it. They loved it so much they're making other people read it. Now, that's something you can't count on, but I was talking to Jason Pinter, who's also in our publishing house, and he said it's a book people want to say they like. It's like it's a good book, and it's one that they feel good about liking. Yes. So I find people evangelizing. Now, that's something you can't actually buy. There's no way to buy that. You can get people to know it's out there, but within a budget. But there's some combination of things that happen in a book sometimes that people will try and sell each other on. And that's important too.
I agree. And that's why, the love of librarians loved your book, but as you know,
I know, I love librarians and they love me.
And that sort of thing, those are recommendations. You trust your librarian, you trust your, local independent bookseller. And so those recommendations mean, so much, and do make more of a difference than you would ever think.
This years ago, there's a best-selling fantasy writer, Tad Williams, who I grew up with. We were teenagers together, and we've been friends forever. We're just good friends. And he was doing some book things, and he did a book thing at a small bookstore, and me and my son came by, and there were 5 people there, right? And I thought he'd be depressed. Afterwards, I said, there's only 5 people showed up. He said, that isn't why I do this. I do this because I need to go to dinner with the booksellers. I need to know the people who work the shop. I need to shake their hands. They're the ones who make my living for me.
Yeah.
And that wisdom of his to get his ego out of the way and just say, this is about me meeting these people and really caring about them and getting to know them because they're the people who paid his bills.
Well, exactly. And I think that, again, I think the people that I see dealing most with that, peril of success or even peril of failure, waiting for success, don't necessarily get their ego out of the way, because there is a lot, writing is a very personal thing, and it takes a lot of, personal, mental energy and emotional energy to do. But once you're not writing, you do need to kind of put on that professional hat, because it's business too. And, it's you can't be so precious about everything that's going on when you also have to, have a business. I mean, it's like being a cover designer. You're making art, but you're also, running a business.
I agree 700%. I think that it takes pure arrogance to face a blank page and turn it into a novel.
Yes.
Pure arrogance. I mean, you have to believe in yourself at an arrogant level. And yet, when your agent calls, if you're arrogant, you're not going to get anything done. So all these things, I'm having to wake up to right now. We're living in a business where I've got a book out on submission. It's the best thing I've ever written. And it takes a long time right now for editors to read anything because they spend all their day dealing with administrivia. As I understand it, I'm going to want your take on this.
Oh, you're going to get it.
As it's explained to me, they're spending all day doing administrivia, and which means after their 8-hour or 9-hour workday is done is when they get to do the editing, the reason they got into this thing and love it. And after they're done editing the books that they have in their catalog, they then get the chance to do the other thing they love, which is read new books for acquiring. Now, that means it's taking a long time for them to read it. I was getting very upset with my agent, and I finally got the truth handed to me, and I went, I'm not. So these people that really trust you have it. They accepted the full manuscript. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it's taking a long time and a lot of nudging to get them to read things because they don't have the fucking time.
When I tell you, I have to, I don't know if it's brilliance or idiocy on my part, but other than a couple of doctors, all of my friends are writers. Like every single last one of them. I glutton for punishment. I don't know. At least I'm just surrounding myself with people who know how to hide bodies really well, if nothing else. But so when I tell you, I have to explain this to people, generally my friends, once to twice a day right now. I have a friend who recently left his agent for really good reasons, might I add. Like agent incompetence, that sort of reason, and is currently on the hunt for another agent. In the meantime, he's got a bunch of things under contract and is, working and writing and, doing fairly well, but is completely nervous about the fact that he doesn't have an agent because he has a career path and he knows what he wants. And in order to do certain things, he needs an agent. And, I've been kind of helping him along that path and, seeing, read the query, whatever. And even though intellectually he knows that it won't take like a day or a week, I still get a text like, well, that agent that we thought I should query, a couple of weeks ago, I haven't heard. When should I follow up? I'm like, a year from now? Like
now in the world we're in? Yeah.
I'm like, and the thing is, I get it. Right. Just like you're eager to hear back on these submissions, he's eager to hear back, and get a new agent. And I get that. I actually have an email in my box right now from a man who's brilliant and has written several other books. And I'm looking at one to potentially publish through Agora. And I have been looking at this since, I'm going to say September. Because kind of just like you said, like he submitted it probably, let's say September. I might be being not generous with myself here. And I read the first, 50 pages that he sent when I finally had a chance to do that. And then I remembered to request the rest. And then eventually he sends that to me. But now I've got different other things that I'm doing. So I haven't gotten around to finishing the book. And it's something that I clearly like, but right. I know. Right. And I feel terrible about that. But the thing is, I have books that I've already acquired.
Right.
And I've got books that I've already acquired waiting in line too, because, we're rushing things. Not rushing is the wrong word, but we have to move up our timelines to such an extent right now.
Explain that quickly so that
I will try.
What is the timeline that you got moved up? So
we basically we have to go to press double the time in advance than we used to. So
you have to have the ready to print document to put in line for when it will get printed, which they've now added a month onto that. So you have to get to a month earlier or more.
Exactly.
The finished document edited, you and the writer done all your work.
Not only the document has to be edited, copy edited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The cover has to be finished. I have to have all of the reviews and blurbs in. Jesus. Which is a whole other snafu because you're not giving people who are just, it's not just editors who are this busy. Everybody,
Yeah.
agents are this busy, everybody's this busy right now. And not just in publishing. And then I feel bad that I have to go and ask some poor other writer, can you please drop everything and read this book? And oh yeah, I kind of need it now. This blurb.
Wow.
And some of the trade publications that we're used to pulling quotes from when they get reviewed are now coming in like really close to pub date, if not after, occasionally. So before we get them so far in advance and we could put the, pull quote on the cover. Now we're like sitting, biting our nails as we approach the date that we have to have, tell the printer to print and go, are these coming in?
Right.
So, I'm doing this on all of these books that, need to go to press basically immediately. And then I've got like fall titles that aren't edited yet, because I have to deal with this immediately now, or it won't actually print. So it's kind of, not only do I have like the submissions in queue, et cetera, but I've got my own acquired books that are waiting in a queue.
Oh my God. Because as a writer, I don't know about other writers. Let me just talk about me. As a writer, I take shit so personally. Like, I'm just sure there's some other writer that's getting all of the time of my favorite editor or this person or that, or the reason this company won't look at me is they've got much bigger writers to listen to. No, that's not true. It's so, hearing you say this actually helps my brain. I go, okay, if everybody's going through it, then I don't have to take it personally.
Well, and one of my friends is an editor as well. And we joke almost every day about, like, have you done any editing today? And we're like, nope. Like the other day I was,
but that's the thing you want to do.
Down books going that were lost in Canada. Like,
fuck. And this is the part that you love doing. I know.
Yeah.
We've talked about the thing you love doing is working with material, and you don't get to do that.
Exactly.
So for very little money, you get to do administrivia.
A lot of that, it's true. I mean, but
at least you have the penthouse.
And I do try to prioritize, and it's like, if your book is coming out really soon, you are a priority, and I figure I can always, catch up on everything else because, there's a pub date incoming and I really need that book to do its best showing, book that book events, make sure that book is, complete and polished and ready to go with all of its blurbs, etc.
How can writers help editors? Thoughts?
Honestly, I don't really have a lot of, like, I know, and I feel bad that I know I cause mental distress to some of my writers by, they're like, well, when are we getting this? Or what are we supposed to be doing? Or I think, and I'm really lucky that everybody's fairly understanding. And
you are beloved, I've got to tell you. When I'm at a book conference and I mention your name, everyone goes, oh, I hear nothing but good things about her.
Oh,
so
I pay them. No, I don't.
As mean and evil as you are, I'm just surprised as all hell. But I hide it, okay?
You hide it well. Honestly, I think just understanding that, like, and knowing, I had an author recently, which I believe you absolutely should do. Like, ask for deadlines. Like, when should I have this to you, as an editor? Right. When can I expect copy edits? When do I have to, have turnaround? And editors and publishers should give you those things.
Right.
However, I can guarantee that if I give them to you, you may as well just ignore them. Because especially right now, like, all bets are off. And I'm hearing this from all fronts. Like, agents are not able to, read through their submissions. They're not, it's across the board.
Before I went to Left Coast Crime, my son Dylan said what he has said since the pandemic started. He said, Dad, remember, you have to be flexible and you have to be kind. And I thought, that's advice I need all the time. If a deadline shifts, I have to be flexible. And then I have to be kind to the person I'm talking to, because these are people who care about books the way I do. And sometimes I get not that. I get something else.
Yeah, no, that's really it. Be flexible, be kind. And I swear, it's always best laid plans, you know, and I'll be like, okay, today is editing day. And then there will be a crisis, you know, there are books missing in Canada or whatever happened.
That's insane.
And that just sort of thing derails your whole day. And then honestly, you know, Amy was not wrong about, you know, then after work is when you edit, but sometimes you're too tired after work and you can literally do nothing but stare at a wall. I don't think, you know, supply chain has made it worse, but I think that it's also, I do think that there's some level of like pandemic fatigue, and especially in other publishing houses, you know, that we've lost people places. And so people are having to do the jobs of, you know, 3 or 4 people that they didn't have to do before. And, you know, I hope that publishers are compensating them for doing that. I'm hearing some horror stories. But, you know, and people are leaving because it's too stressful and we can't do the job that we want to do because of that. I'm lucky. And honestly, I was lucky during, you know, the height of the pandemic, where my job did not, other than it became a lot harder to schedule, you know, events or get people to hear about a book. That part of my job became very hard. But otherwise, you know, we're lucky because this is something, you know, a writer can do this remotely. Publishers can do it largely remotely. And people wanted to still read. And so on the whole, as much as I will complain about it, we survived, you know, the height of the pandemic very well as an industry.
And Agorapolis has survived and actually done excellent work. Great books coming out. Just to toot your horn.
Thank you.
I think because what I've seen in this, again, because my agent was also an editor and came out of that world and has a lot of friends in it, it started with assistant editors and beginning, and now she said they're top editors who have just looked around, who are acquiring editors, managing it, who look around and go, this isn't fun. They caught their breath in the middle of the pandemic and were working from home and said, I don't want to go back to this life. It's just not what I thought it would be. So we're actually, like every other business, we're losing people.
Right.
We're definitely losing people. And we are also, the book business has not got this huge revenue stream. The revenue stream is not growing. And so there's also that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not big money.
It wasn't large to begin with.
Right. And pandemic, more people are reading, but really we didn't get rich.
It wasn't it wasn't like, oh my God, this is a bounty for us by any means, but it was very difficult. Yeah. But at least, you know, it was something. I feel tremendously bad for, you know, restaurants and places, especially, you know, even independent booksellers. You know, fortunately, some of them were able to ship books. But, you know, when you have an in-person business like that, you know, the university that I work at is down to, I believe it's one administrator for 16,000 students at the one campus location. Because they lost so much money during the pandemic. Housing money was gone, and they've had to lay off entire departments. And it's just, you know, it's a situation that I don't know that they're going to recover from. And, you know, it's because they lost so much of that in-person revenue and so many people. And so, you know, like I said, I'm not saying it was easy, but, you know, I feel bad for, you know, I know restaurants that opened up like the week before lockdown, and I'm just like, I have no idea how they can, you know, pay rent. And, it's just.
Yeah, it's across the board. And God bless independent booksellers who've remained. Mm-hmm. They give me
and
hope.
The new ones that are opening. There was one that opened just last week that I saw.
We've got one in Idlewild that just opened, and I was so happy. And it's a small space, but it's a great space. And I saw Tricky in there and went, dang.
Well, I'm actually scrolling through Twitter right now because I would love. I know I retweeted that bookstore. And I would love to give them a shout out to the one person who listens to this podcast who is probably not in the same city as this store, but still. But still, I'm going to take 5 minutes of our time to find where I put that. And
well, you look for that. I'm going to give advice to my fellow writers.
Oh, please.
All right, everyone else, just don't listen. Writers, listen for a second. Dennis Lehane's a big star. He's a big writer, okay? But he had this series. He was 2 books into the Kenzie Gennaro series. A good crime series, but not, And he had to write this book that was eating his ass. I heard him talk about this years ago. And the book that was eating his brain up, he went to his agent and said, I just have to write this. I can't do another in my series until I write this. And that doesn't make sense in a business sense. The book he wrote was Mystic River. Now, it's an amazing book. It's a departure for him. It became something important. And the reason I bring that up, it also was made into a big movie. I mean, all these things, there's a whole bunch of stuff around that, but it changed the trajectory of his career. And the reason I bring this up is that I'm trying to remind myself as things slow down and it takes forever to hear from someone and it takes a year to get an agent to read, like, and love you, or a publisher. This is the time to write that project you always wanted to write. This is the time while you're waiting to see what happens to your book that won't come out for another year and a half. So nobody has an expectation of what you're working on. Then write the one you love. I think you should always do it, but this is clearly a time for us to write our passion projects. It's sometimes hard to find what you love if you're into your career. I'm pretty deep in. I've written enough books that I've gotten a lot of stuff out of the way, but there's something growing in my head that I've just shared the title with some friends and I'm going, there's something in it I need to write. This is the time for me to be writing that, because once the next book comes out, people, if it's great, if it's successful, well, the problem is they'll want another one. So why don't I work on the one that nobody knows about, because it doesn't have any ego attached to it or any pressure attached to it. That's what we can do to help editors and agents and everyone else, is we can just keep working. And luckily we can do that. And that is my second soapbox for this whole podcast.
And I think it's actually wonderful advice. I really like that, because you can really right now be driving yourself crazy waiting to hear. And just like, when we were talking about the perils of success, you not hearing has nothing to do with you or the quality of your work. But it's hard to sit there not hearing and not assume that that's the reason. So no, absolutely. Be productive, be positive about this. And I did find the name of the bookshop. It's in Oregon and it's called Books Around the Corner. And you can find them on all social media. It's mostly at Books Around the Corner, and it's booksaroundthecorner.com. So it's brand new. And I think it's really exciting that they're, trying to do this. And
thank God somebody else.
Right?
And I love bookstores.
So do I. So yes, that's good. And, we're at about time. So I guess ending on these positive, encouraging notes is completely unlike us, Josh.
So just remember, none of this is going to work. It's all going to fail. So we might as well write our best works right now.
Exactly.
If you had one last book to write and then your career was over, what would it be?
And also, enjoy the silence, to quote Depeche Mode. Once you hear back from that agent or that editor, you're going to have a lot of work to do. So just enjoy the fact that you can kind of be calm. Consider it a vacation. I don't know what that word means, but I've heard it used before.
Yes. Well, this has been lovely. Thank you.
It has. And I will. You can find us. All of our information is in the show notes. Be sure to track us down. Not for any nefarious purposes, though. Please.
Only me for nefarious. I do nefarious. That is not Chantelle's business. Okay, that's my business model.
And do remember, all of you out there in podcast land, hug a thug this week.
Hug a thug.
Between a boring and exciting